Welcome to Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. I'm Betsy Cunningham, one of the hosts, and I'm here in the room with a couple of people who are going to introduce themselves. John.
I'll go first. I'm John Hunter with Community Rights Douglas County and the Oregon Community Rights Networks.
I'm Zach Whitworth, born and raised Brownsburg, Oregon. I'm a graduate student in the history department at the University of Oregon and affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology. Always happy to be here.
Either one of the other folks want to introduce yourselves? You don't have to, but you're welcome to. All right. So if you want to at some point, you can chime in and do that. So the topic was kind of an open discussion, that we do that periodically. A lot of times it just means is we didn't find somebody to talk specifically about something. So, but our world does not have has a whole lot of stuff that we can talk about, even this corner of it or how it impacts it. So anybody, what do you want to bring up?
Well, I'll bring up something locally here I've been thinking about. You kind of were talking about the other day on Facebook, and I started thinking about it more when I noticed that he has a big sign on a billboard on our I-5, and he's getting campaign signs out, and that's Steve Hammerson that's running against Boyce, and there's four candidates in that race, and we hope that it can be forced into a runoff in November, and we hope it's Andrew. But God, what happens because you got five people running in that thing, and let's figure maybe give Boyce 50%. That's the other 50% divided up by the other four. We could have a situation where Hammerson with his wacko crazy group could actually maybe be in a runoff in November with Boyce.
That is definitely the risk.
Yes. And I don't think there's a lesser of two evils in that group. So
that becomes the real conundrum if that happens. Hopefully it is Andrew of the choices that we have in that race, and from my point of view. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, I never really considered until I saw his billboards and I started seeing his signs go up. And, oh my God, this is.
Well, the Republicans don't certainly consult me about their internal business operations, their central committee. And but there has been a kind of a conflict within the Republican Party for quite a few years.
Yeah. So to me, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and how many votes he gets. So, but I don't know. That was just kind of a scary thought I had. So anyway, Indivisible had a protest yesterday out in front of Boyce's Big O Tire, and I got there just a little bit before it started, and guess who came walking across the street? Boyce, and he was talking to some people, and then he went over to talk to MA, and I guess maybe he was playing politics or something. He was telling people that he would walk across the street to talk to MA. But before he walked away, I kind of thought I should ask him, yeah, but people like me drive a half an hour into Roseburg to talk to you at a commissioners meeting, and you don't even give us a chance. So I don't think it. And anyway, yeah, it was interesting that now that it's getting close to election time, and he because he's been over there before at the other, at the protest going. I've seen him over there watching everybody. So to me, it was interesting that he just kind of decided to walk across the street to meet with people yesterday.
Well, maybe he's concerned about his, reputation as a bully, right?
I
Maybe
guess so.
redeem himself.
I guess so.
Well, one has to show up to a function for a good photograph or a good newspaper story every once in a while to keep up the facade.
You talk about the newspaper, and I'm curious how the demise of the local newspaper is going to impact not only on this year's election, but on the community for many years to come.
Well, the one reason I subscribe to the News Review, I haven't had a paper subscription for a while, but I pay, and I guess now I get all of that free or most of it, um, because of the local news aspect. Because nobody else is going to cover local news. Well, the Beacon will, whatever their perspective, and I'm not even sure how much local news. I haven't read a Beacon in quite a long
The
time, and
beacon,
they're a
the beacon
weekly.
is closed.
Oh, it did. See, I didn't
Yeah.
even know that.
And the world over there on the coast is following our politics over here.
So we should ask people to tell people about it. And is it a full online version or?
Yeah, it's paywalled. It's just like the news review. You get your 3 freebies and then you have to pay.
Well, let's clarify what we're talking about first for those who don't know who are listening or watching this. So this week, the News Review, the local newspaper based in Roseburg, announced that they are finally ending their print runs. So there's no print newspaper anymore. At the same time, they also announced the uh, ending of the paywall on the online editions, which they will be continuing, of course. So they are introducing a new premium subscription that is not the same as a paywall, but has certain perks to it. But this does mean, in one sense, that readership of the news review online could potentially expand. Now, to do that, they not only rely still on those subscriptions, those premium subscriptions, but they will also rely much more heavily on advertising. And what that can do is invite a host of new um, sponsored articles, which is fairly commonplace anyway. The news review already does this to a significant extent, but it does remove um, a degree or some degrees of what we could call independence. Not that that was ever seriously an element of the paper, but to lose the print edition does mean that there is a level of access that is stripped away, and it does change how readership engages with the paper. This does mean that effectively anyone can make an account and make the comment sections, which already exist on the news review's website, much more akin to probably a Facebook forum. Uh, Not that they're always pretty as it is, but the opening this up to broader readership with the removal of the paywall probably will do that. And I expect that the news review is going to be um, taking a um, for lack of a better term, much more conservative route. I don't mean that politically, but treading very carefully in order to maintain the basic operations of, I can't even call it the paper anymore, the web newspaper, the e-newspaper.
Thanks for making that clarification because you're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that they're totally been flushed down the toilet yet. Um, but it's not good. It does not really bode well for the existence of it. But you know, and Kat, when did the Beacon quit publishing?
If you're talking cat, you're muted.
Well, I'll jump. We do have a new one that has started up, the Roseburg Receiver too, which they seem to be doing. At least
Well,
they're trying to do a pretty good job.
yeah, there are a couple of online
Yeah.
He's David
places that try to do
Vandermark.
it.
He's
But
David Vandermark's adopted son.
the receiver,
Yes. And the Beacon
gotcha.
has been closed for about a year.
Really? So see, it has been quite a while since I paid attention to
You haven't even walked downtown.
it.
Does he have many people
Actually, I do, but not that corner, apparently. Um, so,
Well, so there's another element to this that I think we have to dwell on here. So, of course, there's the broader press landscape. A local newspaper is always going to be competing with um, other newspapers in the region. Not that in Douglas County, the News Review has necessarily had serious competition in, say, even statewide newspapers like the Oregonian. Um, but it does come up against the proliferation of web media, of press on the web, and that can include even mainstream outlets like Fox News or CNN or MS Now, formerly MSNBC, etc., as well as your fringe stuff. Well, fringe in a certain sense, mainstreamed in another. Um, uh, plugs for plugs for the political right, like Breitbart, or even there's even a competition that could be had with even not-for-profit organizations that work through public broadcasting, like Democracy Now! These are all in one big shared market. And for a while, local news has not really been faring well against those for obvious reasons, because those other platforms have substantially more capital behind them, or in the case of something like Democracy Now, grassroots funding, but they have platforms that reach far and wide and much wider than any local news outlet. Um, but uh, what what's also opened up, of course, in the last some years have been locally focused. Um, I hate to call them news sites or news platforms, but they frame themselves as such, that are made by people who uh, live locally or semi-locally. And I'm thinking especially of uh, platforms like Roseburg Tracker, which is run by Ryan Finley, who presently sits on the Parks and Recreation Commission and has openly expressed his desire for the return of uh, uh, public executions, and is viciously promoting cryptocurrency wherever he goes. Um, the man is a scam artist. And that's not just what will continue to fill the void, but these kinds of platforms are what have slowly eroded, in part, the presence um, of semi-serious, at least, papers like the News Review and Roseburg. If you are getting your news increasingly from uh, a hack self-professed journalist who is more akin to an agitator than anything else. Uh, I don't see that there's a bright future for serious local media that is not in the sense of being unbiased, but that is rigorous in its research to any kind of degree.
Yeah, I think that's the real problem is because they don't have the resources. And it takes a long time. Even the kind of news media, which my, one term stint on the UCC mainstream. Um, and community news, right? In other areas that where we ran community news with the attempt, we were an advocacy group, so there is always that bias, recognized bias, but attempting to follow journalistic standards and with facts, right? And that's a challenge. Who's going to do the research? Who's even going to, we don't even have good news coverage with the news review for years regarding city council meetings, for example, right?
Mhm.
It's very hit and miss. Nothing really on the county commissioners unless something happens. Yet 20 years ago, you would see reporters in those arenas here, in those meetings, right? And then reporting out, every week what was happening in them. And so the whole, journalism has gone, into the shit show of everybody's opinion. Right. I mean, that's what you see. Even anything that attempts to be localized. I mean, obviously we have an opinion about stuff. We hope that what we share as far as, supporting that stuff is factually based. I think probably, those of us who come here regularly are disciplined enough to try to do that. For one, to me, it's a credibility issue of even our opinion, right? So, but where do we get the news about these local politics? Who has the time? If you're young and trying to make a living, that's not getting paid to, be a real journalist is a hard thing to ask.
Mhm. Yeah, and to your point, Betsy, the news review is has been hit and miss. Most of what it has published are mostly fluffy pieces
Yeah.
that don't that are not very informative and that nobody really reads. Uh, the uh, reporting on certain small events, private events and such, uh, they're not the kinds of articles that anyone seriously cares about. But they do fill space and they're great for filling out a page in a paper for print. So what this might invite, on the one hand, could be more fluff, especially sponsored fluff. But there is also a potential here for the news review to um, seize this moment to uh, engage in some serious reporting for the first time in a while, um, because they have to. If they're going to survive in their current form, they need readers for the paper, or former paper, e-paper, the website. And to do that, you need compelling material. Um, that could also be potentially disastrous. That material could be um, leaning into sensationalism, as papers have been have tended to do since their inception. Even in the days of the American Revolution, that was well-known muckraking and such, to the point where even Thomas Paine said, "No, this is not honest journalism." Uh, so opportunities, I think, are there. Potentials are there for the news review to maybe offer something different that has not been present in this community before. But that said, uh, they will do what keeps them alive, and that's going to be whatever brings in the most capital to keep them functioning at a basic skeletal level.
I think they're entering an arena that is much more competitive than the one that they're leaving. Certainly, it's going to increase as AI continues. The other thing is, how are municipalities, cities, counties going to post the legal notices and some of the real estate transactions and foreclosures and those things that legally have to be posted according to most bylaws. However, in the recent years, I think they have been softening those bylaws to include electronics forms of the postings, but there may be some caught that aren't. So a guy a long time ago told me that the most important parts of the newspaper are in the small print in the back, and that's where the legal notices are, because that's where you find out about zoning changes, land use changes, and your local government legal postings. So how is that going to be addressed without a local newspaper?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. I can speak with my historian hat on. It is on, technically. It's my union hat. But that's something that actually comes up for historians. So I, for instance, read old newspapers from 100, 150 years ago from Douglas County and the surrounding area. And exactly those kinds of postings were central features of the newspaper. So it's something that we've taken as given for a very long time, generations upon generations. And and on that, to speak still as an historian here, there is a problem now of what will be left for those studying this period in Douglas County in the future. If anyone has ever spent any time with an archivist and talked to them about digital preservation, one thing that will always come up is that digital preservation is often far more difficult and far more tedious than the preservation of physical materials. So a born digital material like a PDF document, like you would get, uh, if whether it's a form or it could be a PDF of an e-edition of a newspaper. Those are those are quite difficult to preserve in the long term. These digital files do not exist forever. They decay just like anything else, but they decay at a much more rapid rate than physical material. And that means that archivists have to use very specific methods, like putting them on rolls of tape, or putting them on CDs, which also have shelf lives. Digital files can still decay even in those cases. And so they have to be continually kept up. So for a digital publication to have anything like a serious archive of its material for, say, an historian 50 years down the road or 100 years down the road, or more than that potentially, they require um, serious funding to maintain an archive. Otherwise, that digital material can very easily be lost. And we'll find ourselves well, or historians in 100, 200 years or beyond that will look back on this period as something of a dark age in the classic sense of there being effectively no material to really study, to understand what was going on politically, socially, commercially in this region and others similar to ours. Um, People just won't know these kinds of things because of this move toward electronic only.
But Zach, they'll find everything they need to know in the Trump library.
Well, that still requires all of these archival procedures to maintain this information. Whether there's a Trump library or built or not, will it save local newspapers that are digital only in particular? Not necessarily. A print edition, probably. One of the advantages of print publications is that they're made in much larger quantities and distributed. So you could find copies of a news review not just at the Douglas County Museum or held by the news reviews offices themselves. You could also find it at the public library. You could find it probably in somebody's garage in Douglas County. Plenty of people's. Although I'm sure most people will throw away or recycle or reuse the newspaper in one way or another. There are some people who will keep that stuff, and that's useful for research down the road, or those who just want to understand the past of our own community. It'll even these kinds of print editions will also end up in state archives, whether that's in Salem or at the Oregon Historical Society in Portland, or even at the University of Oregon here in Eugene. The potentials in print publications and print newspapers for actually understanding what has happened, how people are thinking, or what kind of political and commercial developments are transpiring in any given time. Those are essential for people like me, historians, in the future. So I see this now not just as a survival tactic for the news review, and that is indeed what it is. The papers, if it can be called that anymore, is just having to pull this move to survive in some shape or another. But it does destroy something very significant, which is the longevity of the material that they produce itself. Um, that's to say that I think we have entered a kind of dark age with this move, that will leave serious gaps, um, in the historical record. So in the future, if anyone is trying to understand what happened in Douglas County, and seriously, like, how did we find ourselves in the crises that we're in today? Today, 100 years later, or maybe if Roseburg and Douglas County are still intact as political communities at that point, we won't know. We'll have to do some kind of archaeology in order to deduce that, or we'll have to make inferences based on what print material is available. It's totally possible. Uh, so my suggestion to anyone in Douglas County is uh, chronicle what you can and preserve what you can.
I think there are a couple of really good examples of that kind of stuff happening, and when it's happening now and people don't know is well back in 2015 when the news review changed software and you could
Mhm.
no longer access the online archives. So if I wanted to get a copy of the article where Chris Boyce was awarded an extra year to his term or whatever,
Mhm.
Carissa had to go into the morgue to find it. And she only knew where it was because she knew when it happened because she took the notes.
Mhm.
Another thing is all of the county commissioner videos that went all the way back into the 1980s. Some of them didn't even have video, they were just audio, but you could access them until after they changed the software during the pandemic, I believe.
Mhm.
And right now, the county is digitalizing all those big maps that we used to be able to go in the back room and access the paper maps. They are digitalizing all of the records and they're putting them into a big safe right across, well, maybe two safes that are right across from the clerk's office. And you will not be allowed to go in those safes unless you belong to the, what did he tell me? Loomis said it's the the genealogical society
Hmm. Yeah.
are the only ones that will be trained to access the paper copies. So we are losing, yes, Zach, we are losing our history constantly, and it is by design. So the IT people are going in there right now. They have expanded their IT people by, they used to just have two guys, and I knew them both. And now they've got like five. And I think that it might be the people from the tribe that are setting up the new uh, data centers and running all the electronics down there. They have a special branch that is their IT. And
Mhm.
I believe they're helping them to switch over to the latest, greatest software. And we won't even be able to access what we've had recently, most recently.
Mhm.
Won't be able to access them on our own, but I would think they would still be public record.
And you know how good that's going.
So, um, the dire straits of the news desert. Um, there are other things I can notice that next door has, the Roseburg patch and the Wynn Sutherland patch, right? There's some, I don't know if it's AI generated, what it is, that is, creating news by picking up whatever they can that's in there on the
Mhm.
internet, it looks like. So that is probably a sample of what the future is, particularly if it is dominantly AI generated, right? Because they don't need too much human involvement. And I don't really know much about the technology of all that. So that's my 5 cents.
It could be the case. There's enough machine generated material proliferating the web now to warrant that concern. Um, in the meantime, I don't think that the news review is going to go quite that direction for now. Time will tell. But again, I expect that the content of the formerly known as paper is going to be of potentially different quality. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be machine generated, but uh, that's a possibility. But in that case, that's a matter of journalistic integrity, and if that is the case, then we can make us think about that, and the news review's reputation could be toast for good if they do that. So I don't think that that's terribly likely. What I do think though is that the increasing voids of serious journalism in areas like ours will be filled by different platforms that potentially do have that machine generated material churning out fake articles that uh, wind up on Facebook feeds and such. There are enough people in
Well,
the community who are already eating that stuff up on
yeah,
Facebook.
well, I'm thinking about, my evil use of, Gemini. And I could actually have a daily paper in a pretty short period of time. If it was online, I just tell Gemini, go grab this, go see what's happening in county commission, go see what's happening here. What is happening in the health field? I bet you I could. I think there'll be a test for next week. I'll do it. Well, because I think that it's really pretty simple to do. That, you can ask it to generate an article for you, right? 300 words, 600 words. And you could do that in a pretty quick period of time. You cover a lot of subjects.
Hmm.
So that technology is there and available to all of us for free.
Yeah, the danger there would be that if the news review engages in that, and I don't necessarily think that they will, at least not in the short term. Uh, the um, the problem with it is that one of the better ways to sleuth to catch the use of machine generated material when it comes to something like journalism or academic work is in the appearance of what are called hallucinations. So those are usually quotations. So a line that would be supposedly said by maybe a real person uh, in quotes that are totally made up, that do not actually correspond to anything that was actually said. Uh, that has that has to date been fairly simple to determine, like the falsehood or truth or either way, uh, because of the continued existence of, to some degree, serious journalism and academic writing that is the basis um, for those quotations. Uh, the use of large language model, so-called AI, to generate material like that will be much more difficult to disprove with the lack of a, another press outlet in the area that is that has information that refutes that.
But
So,
in this
so
day and
what?
age, the audience probably wouldn't really care. Go ahead, Larry.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is, how do we get past this phase that some of us have been in for a long time? It's the phase of I don't believe anything that I read or see anymore. How long are we going to be in that phase? And when I say we, the generally the world population, because this is happening in every country and in every society because of digital media and people's access to it with any kind of an opinion or point of view, and yeah, they'll get readership. So we as a people have to get through that phase of that the world of communications and information has changed significantly in the last 15 years, and it's going to change even more in the next 10. And what's the human being doing to adjust to the Animal Farm or the 1984 experience?
In terms of trust, then, well, what newspapers have long relied on is historic trust. Uh, Even the News Review, with all of its faults, has long-standing presence in the community. That is what has built its trust over the years. The fact that you could walk into their office and talk with a reporter or an editor is extremely valuable. You can't so easily do that with much larger papers, especially those that are based far from the community and we don't have such direct contact with. But even so, we still look to journalistic outlets like a CNN, for example, for uh, we look to these as trusted sources because we understand that if they were not being truthful, they would not only face backlash, but they would bankrupt themselves doing so. And to your point, Larry, that's kind of out the window. But it's not that it's not so much that um, journalistic integrity has entirely changed across the board. It still has long been beholden to capital for for really as long as newspapers have been around, at least in the modern period. What has changed is the recognition of what journalists, what press outlets actually do, which is engage in rhetoric, whether they're editorials or not, whether they're reports or opinion columns, the language that is used, the framing of any one particular issue from um, from local events to global war. The framing of any one of these events does shape our trust or lack thereof of these organizations. So I think that what we have to reckon with is that when we're talking about the la any kind of lack of trust in whether it's the so-called mainstream media or any other kind of press, we're referring to how we are engaging with and thinking about how we perceive the press, not necessarily what's changed in the press itself, although the press is of course always adapting to new circumstances, competitive market circumstances. They have, they engage in certain kinds of sensationalism or use of certain language, partly to stay afloat, um, uh, and partly to um, partly with the bias of one's own, any journalist's or editor's own preconceived notions about the world and their status within that world. Um, like the New York Times, for example. The New York Times is has long been understood as a reputable institution, and to a large degree, it's got journalistic integrity, but the um, framing of its reports even can be understood to favor, say, a genocidal state. And that's been done even in the last few years, even without them being editorials or opinion columns. And the awareness of that, the heightened awareness of that, I think is more where this lack of trust emerges from. Like we are understanding the world in much different ways. Um, and I think especially in the last 10 years, and I really want to stress like since 2008, and the oncoming of Trumpism in the United States, the so-called alternative facts phenomenon, these I think are less demonstrative of how the press has changed and more of how we are more conscious of what the press generally does, how it operates, and that it's not, really never unbiased. There's always some kind of agenda, so to speak. And it's kind of a minefield when we don't know how to navigate then a press landscape that for a long time we took for granted as being somewhat neutral.
Yeah, exactly.
But
And in the old days, we used to subscribe to the newspaper, magazines, publications that fed our soul, that interested us in the topics, and we trusted them. And as they go away, whether it's a TV station, a radio station, or a newspaper, all of a sudden we are out looking for where is our group now. And in the digital age, it's very easy to get into those silos where you're only going to hear what you want to hear. And the Al Gore rhythms, as I call them, have done the job that they were designed to do by sucking you in. Every time you turn on the telephone in this case, there's an ad for the last thing that you inquired about to your uncle in Omaha. It just knows what you're looking for and it feeds you what you're looking for, whether it's the truth or not.
Mhm.
But it really does predate even the last 10 years. I was thinking, you mentioning the New York Times kind of triggered, one of my favorite journalists is Chris Hedges, who, more recently often talks like a chip on his shoulder, but he probably has damn good reason, and what happened to him, because he started to, report the truth about what was happening in the Middle East specifically. He ended up no longer being the bureau chief and this was, shit, I think it was like 20 years ago now. But you have also other reporters that has happened to, that are now doing independent journalism and have made a place for themselves to some degree out on, the cyber world. But the problem, I think, Larry, is absolutely what you said, the problem of knowing whom to trust. I mean, because of my politics, they're kind of a litmus test I have on who I'm going to trust, but I'm not as likely to go out on a limb as I once was, as far as that source of information. Just because even daily KOS, I mean, a lot of people love that from the left, but sometimes they're a little too conspiratorial for me. Stay away from that conspiracy theory. Let me make up my own mind. Just tell me the facts. So I think that becomes a problem as we blur opinion from factual journalism. And I have no delusions like something like SOPP. We're opinionated as hell. That's what we do.
Well, but my point is that the problem that we're coming up against is that there is no such thing as purely factual journalism that has
True,
no position, that has
true.
no interest, that has no bias, that word gets thrown around plenty. Uh, Everything effectively functions as a kind of propaganda for something. That can be as basic as the insistence upon empirical evidence. That itself has an implicit agenda to it, insisting upon this being the basis for facticity. I happen to agree that's the case because we are sensory creatures. That is the basis for our knowledge. Um, but even so, that is a position. And in any kind of even seemingly neutral, fact-based reporting, there is always choice of language. There is always an author who has a particular place in the world. They have a certain salary, a certain class status. They could be of a certain ethnic background. They might have affinity for the state. They might be invested in Lockheed Martin. They might have interests that you can't clearly see, but that are implied in the kinds of language that they use to describe almost anything. Even if that is taking a seemingly neutral tone. Facts are not so easy to get at. They're always going to be mediated by something, and that mediation can be it could be a new something as simple as a newspaper. It could be the journalists that are telling you what the so-called facts are. But it can also be said in terms of your own perception of the world, like your understanding of the facts in front of you have to do with the way that you sense the world and your own status in the world, how you relate to other people. Those shape what you think of the world. That's all that's what we have to come to terms with these developments in the sphere of journalism, local scale, but also, far beyond us. When we're thinking about these questions of what is true, what is not, it's not so easy a question to answer because we are always wrapped up in whether you call it biases. We're wrapped up in particularities. We're wrapped up in opinions. We're wrapped up in agendas and interests. Um, so I think it necessitates us thinking about what journalism is, what it should be, and how we should not only engage with it, but even participate in the future of journalism. I think it means that we're going to need folks on the local level in Douglas County, and beyond us too. I think this applies to the whole state of Oregon and beyond. We need local journalism renewed, and not through the News Review, but through the efforts of neighbors communicating with each other. Like something as simple as a neighborhood newsletter can go a long way. Um, Something as simple as uh, it could be a group of whatever, 3 to 4 people in a neighborhood who band together and print something out. Maybe they interview their neighbors down the street, and it could be as simple as asking people what they're growing in their garden for a start, if they have a garden, or what they think of the city council, for example. Doing very, very simple reporting on a neighborhood level could open up new possibilities for a new kind of journalistic integrity that's honestly far more democratic than something like the News Review.
You know,
Well, hopefully, go ahead, Larry.
a long time ago, one of my old mentors taught me about our filters and well springs was the term he used. Filters and well springs that kind of make up who we are. So some of my background's in journalism and newspaper and radio. And the basics were the who, what, where, when, why, how, who, what, where, when, why, and sometimes how. And so that's what I look for in a story. And for example, the county commissioner stories that come out almost weekly now with some new proclamation seems
Yeah.
to always feature them rather than the topic of the press release. And it's by what comes in order, you know. It's not the award, the medal, the volunteers that deal with the Meals on Wheels. It's the commissioners' names come first, not the recipients' names, the citizens' names. So it's not only in the content, but the order of that content.
Mhm.
You're absolutely right, Larry. And it's something that I noticed quite a while ago. And I thought, well, this is an interesting way to use public tax dollars for your reelection campaign. And then I went and did an AI search and asked it to compare how many times they produced press releases or these things in 24 and 25 compared to starting in January. And this was, I think, at the end of February, I did this. And it said significantly more times did they have news about the county commissioners from the last two prior years. So I think that they are utilizing it as a campaign, that this is why you're seeing so much profile now. Did they conspire to get that done? I don't know. How would we know if they
I
conspired,
think
right?
this is just like the beacon. I don't know where you've been because it is so obvious. And I'm really angry about all this proofism that people say, well, where's your evidence? Well, if I was there and I saw the murder and I saw them haul off the body and you trust me, I'm going to tell you and you need to be able to trust me. I don't
Well,
need to prove stuff. And the
well,
commission
actually, I
have
was
done.
watching the commission. That's why I know that they had increased, you know, uh, press releases. I was paying attention to that.
Well,
I don't read the Beacon because it's all propaganda that I really don't, I'm not going to read. So
well,
it's a
it's
totally different story.
very honest
But
propaganda.
I wanted to prove my conspiracy theory by asking AI to just collect the data on how frequently in 24 and 25 at this period of time the county commissioners had anything listed about anything that was happening in the county. And it was significantly less. So that is no, I think that they have been using it to promote who they are. What other reason would they do that? Why would they use our tax dollars to promote all these things when and we are paying somebody to do that, right? We have a communications person.
And
Um,
you've got the three commissioners have got their front page bios, all of them running. And now the paper's going to shut down, and all the people that are running against them are only going to be in electronic version that you have to go out and find. It isn't going to be down at the supermarket laying at the end of the counter.
Maybe, but that's why when capitalists run your newspaper, that's what you get.
No,
there's
well,
no,
they
they,
got
they
to
they don't
do.
have to be objective. Let's be honest. We don't even have the same fair use as what I think it is. Maybe Larry, you can help me, what it is on television, right? That we used to have. But we certainly have never had it in newspapers. Papers never
No,
had to give a objective or equal time to all. They did it
no,
because that's their model, but they didn't legally have to.
good riddance to the news review. It's not been a paper since Carissa left. The day she walked out the door was the end of the news review.
Um, well, it actually, yeah, she did some good work when she was there, that's for sure. But I think it ceased to be, was already circling that drain probably 10, 15 years ago. So, before that. So do we have a solution for right here, right now, what we could do as people who live here, as citizens who live here to try to ensure that some of the things, and what are those things? Do people really care about what happens in city council? Do they really care about what the county commissioners do?
They don't know what's city and what's county. They don't know that Reedsport is in Douglas County. They don't know that Reedsport gets its services from Coos County and Lane County. Um, we haven't had a connection with the people on 138 or Highway 38 for since the Home Rule Charter. So we have to actually travel and make the effort to broadcast that kind of information. People don't know what happens down in Josephine County. And that's just, a hop, skip, and a jump across an imaginary line. And that's part of our Southwestern Oregon legislature representatives. And I've got Joanne arguing with me that she isn't represented by Virgil and she doesn't need to know what goes on. And she's practically on the line. I just get so frustrated. I am so frustrated. I will shut up now.
One of the things that I think we should consider, maybe it's free enterprise, maybe it's nonprofit, But since there's going to be so much misinformation and bad information out there that we need to start a fact check business locally somehow in the county or in the city, some kind of a source, an organization that is has somewhat of an apolitical position that some volunteers could do some fact checking. And with the electronic digital media access, it's a matter of somebody disseminating the questions or the issue to a team and let them go at it, and then somehow have a mechanism for posting the findings.
And there's a real problem with the new AI. Since people killed themselves, now the AI is almost worthless. Chat GPT, Google search, it can't go below the very surface. You have to pay, and then you have to train it to go back more than 2 years. It's crazy. Is it talks about sanctuary status in Douglas County, and sanctuary status did not start as anything that had to do with immigration. Sanctuary status was because Republicans did not want taxation without representation and unfunded mandates, and they refused to spend the money on prisoners that weren't breaking a county law. So if we were picking up federal prisoners, we had to pay for their food and their medicine, their hospitalization. So we just decided we weren't going to be involved in that. And AI cannot find that unless you prompt it. So
That
I don't know
that
about
may be
that.
true. That may be true, Kat, but we actually did discuss the origins of the sanctuary law, what is called sanctuary here in Oregon, that happened in the 80s. And I think it might have been in the last SOPP last Sunday or the one before, because we talked about ICE on both of them. But that to me, even calling it sanctuary, given what it really was, it was to stop unfunded mandates.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That
unfunded
was the
mandate.
reason.
But
That's
you
right.
can't find that just by a simple search on AI.
Yeah, I'll look into that, because that is significant to me for people to understand the reason that it happened. And not that I don't agree with, it in philosophy regardless, but I think that the reality is that most people have a misconception of what it actually was about. It was
Yeah,
not because of the the diehard liberals in Oregon wanting to protect immigrants.
it
Because if
was
they
totally a
did,
Republican kind of thing where they named it the opposite of what it is.
I wasn't here in Oregon and when that happened, so I don't really know.
I
I
was
just
too young, working too hard to know. But I just think
so
that fact checking is only as good as the fact checker and the person that can dig down through it. What Zach is talking about with, uh, God, what did he say? I hate it when that happens. Oh, that it makes up quotes. I think that isn't a bug. I think that's a feature so that people in academia can ferret out who is writing their paper strictly with AI. I think it's meant to do that, to put those quotes in there that don't exist.
No, that's not how it works.
Well, Zach,
A,
go
a,
ahead and
a
tell.
program like ChatGPT, for example, and this applies to Gemini, it applies to Pilot, it applies to Claude, similar programs. These are transformers. They are predictive text software fundamentally. That's what these are built on, large language models. And so a hallucination, as they're called, these false quotes, are inserted because they're not because they're explicitly fake or not, but because they are statistically considered in line of writing a piece of text. They are statistically considered to be the most reasonable thing for an LLM to produce next. It operates very much the same way as predictive text does in an email program that you might use, or a word processing program like Google, like a Google document or Microsoft Word. It's the same principle at the bottom of it. It's the same technology. So it's not that these are inserted um, uh, consciously by anything, or that there is a piece of these programs that deliberately inserts these hallucinations. No, these are highly unprofitable features, bugs of these LLMs, so-called AI. So they're it's just an ongoing problem that even software developers are trying to work out. Because you're not going to make money on your program if they're inconsistent when, say, speaking from an academic perspective, if a student is using a ChatGPT to generate a paper and it's filled with hallucinations, I've given students zeros when I find those. So it's
Absolutely.
not they're not going to succeed that way, and then they're certainly not going to be paying OpenAI for a premium version of a shit program. Pardon my French.
Well, and now
Absolutely.
lawyers, lawyers are glomming onto this, and AI. And there's, I had mentioned one before, um, you know, doing an AI with Gemini on a legal question, and then going to Open Case, which is written for lawyers and is written with a larger language model. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of like, the answers in Jeopardy. They're all based on a predictive model of what's most logical, the answer, right? So it's and that's a good news in the sense that it won't take over humans right now. um but the bad news is if people rely upon it too much, right? And I think that that becomes a concern. And so in any arena, whether it's academia, whether it's a law, whether it's medicine, you know what that impact has on relying upon the technology too much, period.
So,
Whether it's
Zach,
for your news.
Sorry,
how long do you think it'll be before AI crashes itself?
before it crashes itself? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
before it makes itself useless.
Uh, that's very vague. But presently, large language models, so-called AI, like those that are produced by OpenAI, so ChatGPT's is the example. It's training on its own slop at this point. Uh,
Yes,
the amount of because these programs are trained by scraping the web. Originally, it was scraping Reddit and Twitter and even Wikipedia and other social media platforms, especially. Because of that, the information that has been used to train it is not very reliable. Hence the proliferation of hallucinations, among other problems. Um, but it also has been used since to generate material that has proliferated on the web. And because OpenAI still trains its models on the web, it's ultimately training it's ultimately training its GPT programs on material that's been already generated by programs like GPT.
yes,
So it's like a feedback loop in that
yes.
sense. So at that level, there's you could call it a uselessness that arises. Like it's already maxed out um, the the inputs that have any real meaning to them. But uh,
And the new guardrails that they have, they can't talk about this or that. It's not allowed to give you an answer about that subject.
Yeah, that's fairly standard. It's become fairly standard in these companies building large language models. That there were generations of like child pornography that were being produced by models like GPT. Um, I don't think that they've entirely been solved to my knowledge.
And
Um,
I'm pretty sure they're on the dark web that I can't get to. That's okay. But um, I
Well,
just,
these programs have been known to be prone to producing really horrifying material because there's a lot of horrifying material on the web, and that's what it's trained on. So
yeah,
there are guardrails that do have to be put in place to protect against the generation of certain material, especially the child pornography thing. That's been a recurrent issue with development of LLMs.
well, I think AI was only invented so that men could have willing women. They're just always, every movie they ever make about AI and robots is about a man falling in love with a robot woman.
You know,
That's not really true. Uh,
Betsy's
Plenty.
Really?
Oh
That's
boy.
not
Betsy's
that. Like I,
comment.
Robot's probably one of the more well-known AI films, or um,
Yeah,
even Matrix is filled with
yeah.
so-called AI, fantasy AI that does not really feature that. But the question about what it was originally intended to be used for, I think is not. Um, I think it's treating these large language models as something other than technology. They're forms of technology. They're developed to expand what it is possible for humans to do. Um, First and foremost, just to say nothing about the psychotic views of billionaires like Sam Altman, who head the companies like OpenAI that are developing these things. But I think of LLMs very similarly to, say, the cotton gin. Cotton gin is not built for like you know desirous desirous lust for women or something of that sort. No, it's developed for the making more efficient and productive of labor for the production and profiting on materials from cotton to indigo to now you know timber to fabrics to steel, all these things. LLMs, I think, function more historically understood as on the furthest end of the continuum to date of uh, productive technologies or technologies that are developed specifically to uh, spur the generation of further profits by making work more efficient. But of course, like the cotton gin, it doesn't do that. It just intensifies conditions of slavery.
Only Zach could make a connection between the cotton gin and sex. That's really a remarkable
Well,
feat.
I'm saying there's not really a connection there. It, maybe there's
He has a
study.
fantastic mind there.
Um,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not saying that there's a connection between the cotton gin and sex. There's some scholar out there who can make that connection and maybe make a really interesting argument that'll change our views of what technology is developed and used for. But I think it's better understood as it's long been understood by those who've studied commerce, technology, and the marketization and industrialization of the globe. These are tools for the generation of further capital. That's the ultimate conclusion that I would come to on this.
Well, the conundrum is if they eliminate all the jobs for humans, who's going to consume their capital? Because
Well,
we're all going to starve.
So a couple things on that. Firstly, it is important to note that the entire conversation in the public eye, in press outlets, on television, wherever, politicians talking about this, about um, universal basic income has largely been spurred by those who are heading these LLM developers. Sam Altman, for example, is well, actually Sam Altman's probably the to my memory, he's I think the biggest donor to these. Um, some may have heard of a number of experiments in the last 10 years, one of the most notable being in Stockton, California, some years ago, testing whether or not a universal basic income could be feasible and whether or not it would significantly change somebody's ability to survive and thrive. So pilot programs have been launched in various cities. Stockton's probably the best known example. Um, that gave either it was either $1,000 or $2,000 a month to a select number of people, and it's just a handful of people. And then at the end of this period, which I believe was extended even further in the Stockton case, the participants reported that they were feeling happier, healthier. They could pay off their bills, pay off debts that they owed, etc., and were doing generally better. And it promoted the idea of a universal basic income being not just necessary but desirable, and a decent reform for the United States. But these experiments have almost all been funded the most by Sam Altman of OpenAI, who is one of the richest men on the planet, and who is a complete psychopath. Uh, my humble opinion, based on my reading on him.
Except for the universal basic income, which I've supported for decades.
Well,
I,
but the universal basic income as it's imagined. So setting aside it as in general terms, as it's imagined by tech CEOs in Silicon Valley who have been pushing it, particularly men like Altman who are in the LLM development sphere of things. They understand that a universal basic income is going to be um, drawing from the profits generated by production by large language models like ChatGPT and others, video production like their Sora program and others, generally so-called AI being the centerpiece of most industrial labor, at least in the United States. So they see it as reliant on that, which is to say, it is reliant on the expansion and intensification of capitalist domination and mechanization of life, and the stripping of people of uh, even creative ability, considering the direction that LLMs are tending toward. Um, I think it for them it falls very much in a distributist model, rather than um, a uh, more communal and mutualistic model of social welfare. It still requires a state to function. It still requires capital to function. It still requires military to function. It still requires money to function, which the existence of presumes the existence of militaries and states. It requires the continuation of a market society, which is eroding the basic habitability of the planet. Um, and at the same time, especially as it was put forward famously by Andrew Yang, who ran for president under a Democratic Party ticket a few years ago, whose campaign was also sponsored by Sam Altman and others. And
Oh,
so
was it really? I didn't know that.
I, yeah, there's been some really great journalism on this. Wired magazine especially has been putting out a lot. The Wall Street Journal was publishing a lot. Karen Howe is one journalist who just put out a book last year called Empire of AI that goes into great detail on this as well. I definitely recommend that to anyone interested in this subject. But in the Andrew Yang campaign, which captivated the hearts of even many self-professed communists in the United States, some who I even know personally, um, not necessarily here in this meeting, but I know people who profess to be Marxists and communists, or even anarchists who really loved Andrew Yang even more so than Bernie Sanders. Not that Bernie Sanders is a serious socialist and by any means. Um, uh, but Andrew Yang was putting forward the program that the Silicon Valley CEOs were in of UBI, which was basically as a replacement for social welfare. That's to say, universal basic income would be instead of a Medicare, much less Medicare for all. It would be instead of Medicaid, much less universal coverage under such a program. It would be instead of um, uh, programs like SNAP, or your Oregon Trail cards here in Oregon. Basic forms of subsistence at the end of the day that people rely on and have relied on, especially since the New Deal was implemented. The New Deal that made much of the population deeply reliant on these state programs, including Social Security. These nutcases in Silicon Valley, you know, are for lack of a better word, sociopaths or psychopaths who have not been socialized in any serious way, and are completely demoralized people, besides being capitalists who function only for the continued extraction and domination of humankind, much, as well as the natural world on the whole, and seek to take it to outer space. This is a destructive kind of plan. Universal basic income is in that regard very sinister, especially taken in isolation. That's not to say that something along the lines of a universal basic income as a kind of reform does not have its merits. But as it's been put forward, especially in recent years, it is quite insidious and is driving public conversation about social welfare, public welfare, the well-being of people, and the need for mutualistic assistance and caring for our neighbors through our political institutions. It throws that aside. It does not even include those in a discussion. If we want to talk about something like a universal basic income, even something that could start on a local level, like in Douglas County, um, we do have to understand that it is not an answer. It's not some kind of magic bullet that will knock out social disparity in terms of political disparity, of commercial wealth disparity, material disparity generally. It's not even necessarily a piece of the puzzle, but it can be a way potentially to um, open our neighbors up to a broader conversation about what actually sustains a community. Because it's not universal basic income. It's the elimination of what we call income.
And that may be the bigger answer is the elimination of income anyway. That's true. But I think that the, the discussion, around universal income, notwithstanding Yang, and I'm one of those communist socialists who know I was not persuaded by Yang's argument. For one, having followed these experiments of basic income, not enough income to actually change people's lives. Doesn't provide them freedom. The other thing is I've learned since, the 1980s when I first started studying this in depth for a replacement of the social welfare system, because there's real problems with TANF and the way people are degraded and they have to beg and scrape. Same thing with SNAP. Same thing with SNAP. So if that universal income replaced those things, the problem with it is it financially really cannot replace healthcare for all. The system, because it relies upon, without removing that third payer, that needs to be removed from the healthcare system. The other thing is, I've come to the realization that it really would be too much of a heavy lift to replace affordable public housing. That basic necessity, and other things may fall within that, but I see no problem with it replacing SNAP or TANF or SSI or even Social Security as an income. And everybody's entitled to a certain livable income and those basic needs. But that's a much longer story and thing to
Well,
discuss.
you would think people in Douglas County would understand how AI is affecting their lifestyle. I mean, you're going to take away their chainsaws if you bring in AI, because a man with a chainsaw can feed his whole family in Douglas County. It's absolute insanity. But they should be able to look at what's happening to the mechanization in the mills. Do they not realize it doesn't matter how much timber comes out of those hills? There aren't any jobs except for the truck drivers, and the truck drivers are getting paid less and less all the time. And how long before AI is driving the trucks?
Well, that might be a good topic to, one of these months soon. I was looking at May, possibly, if not that June. Chuck Willer's going to come here in person. We're going to do a hybrid meeting. We're going to talk about kind of the economics of the timber world. And I think you're absolutely right. Automation did a lot to reduce the jobs over the last 30 years. AI is going to even replace some of those workers, no matter what that happens. So I think that is a bigger discussion, whether you're going to get hordes of people with chainsaws coming to anything we put on. That's another matter, or even watch it.
True that.
So does anybody have anything else? Because we are at an hour and a half almost. Uh, do we have any other topic anybody wants to share? Comment tomorrow night at the Roseburg City Council. Folks should show up. ICE is going to be brought up on the agenda. It is not formally on the agenda, but there's that period of time at the beginning of the agenda, and that's where we can bring it up as people who are concerned about it. And then Ruth Smith has committed to address that in her comments, which are at the end of the agenda. Although they don't usually, why that has to be that way as far as her bringing it up is because that's the way, and we've talked about this, the problem with not interacting with the crowd is some kind of formal control. I don't know what it is. Last I looked, there were about 40 signatures on the online petition. We have several hundred that are in the handwritten petitions that have been circulating around. There's also an effort, and hopefully it happens, is a high schooler and at Roseburg High is looking to organize, something for the following city council meeting. So people should come out and help that person. And so if you're on the Indivisible Roseburg or Douglas County website, the person is actually even posted in there. And so, we need to give people, particularly young people, they do this stuff. We need to give them as much support as possible. And we need to not tell them what to do. Okay. We just, unless they're going to do something illegal and real stupid, maybe, but otherwise, you know, I just want to follow their lead, and hopefully they're able to organize something, and that sends another message. So does anybody have any updates about the ICE thing? I've just been juggling a variety of shit, so
Nothing new to report.
Hmm? Did you say, what did you say, Zach?
Nothing new to report.
Oh, okay. So anybody else have anything else they want to talk about? John, Larry, Kat,
No.
Zach? No. Isn't community rights going to do something in May?
We hope to, yeah. We hope to have another community follow-up thing. Hopefully, we're going to have a Zoom meeting with Stephanie on Tuesday and start getting something resolved. Get a date set. We would like to have it at the Rainbow Kitchen. Rainbow, they're having a lot of financial issues right now too, so maybe we can make it a benefit for the Rainbow Kitchen as well.
Yeah, maintaining the existence of that space is very necessary.
Yeah, well, she let her whole staff go, and Aaron's only working 12 hours a week. So, yeah, so maybe we can help them out at the same time. Because
Yeah,
it's
unfortunately, with the kind of funding where that comes from because of what happened, right? In a federal level, it's probably not too surprising, unfortunately.
yeah. So anyway, I'll know more next week, hopefully.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for coming. And anybody have any ideas of what they want to talk about? So I can find somebody who knows a lot about it. I did talk about Donna Cohen being she does the civics for adults, and I was hoping to get her for the Sunshine Week, but that didn't happen. She's actually going to do the show on Mother's Day, and she's going to talk about not her basic stick, but the stuff that is raised concern regarding because of the Trump administration, the kind of things that are going on that she thinks are important for people to understand regarding, what is happening, but also maybe what we can do about it. And so, anybody have any other ideas of who they want on, what they want to talk about? Let us know.
Will do.
All right.
Thank you.